Hellboy: The Web of Wyrd is a roguelite third-person brawler that features the iconic comic book character Hellboy as he traverses the Wyrd, not weird, Wyrd. You'll come across plenty of different characters that you may recognize from the Hellboy universe. As for me personally, I'm not like super big into the Hellboy comic books. I've seen a couple of the movies back in the day, not the new one, but the older ones. So I'm not like super well versed in like who Scheherazade is or the different characters that show up. But I understand the main premise of Hellboy, which is essentially a supernatural investigator of some sorts who has a big hell fist and usually uses some sort of weapon like a shotgun or something like that. Hellboy is one of the unique characters in comic books that does not come from either Marvel or DC. They are an independent character who I believe is published by Dark Horse Comics or IDW, something like that. Don't quote me. I like I said, I'm not like super big into Hellboy, but when I saw the trailers and whatnot for Hellboy: Web of Wyrd, I definitely was intrigued. The art style alone is enough to get you interested and looking into this game with maybe a bit of a magnifying glass. And once it released just before Spider-Man 2 and Mario Wonder, I knew that I had a limited amount of time to really enjoy and dig into Hellboy before I got sucked under the waves of Spider-Man 2 and company. And you may be feeling the same way. Maybe you didn't buy Hellboy simply because there were so many other games coming out in October. Just a week after Spider Man was Alan Wake 2. A week before Hellboy was Assassin's Creed Mirage, or maybe 2 weeks before Hellboy was Assassin's Creed Mirage. And October was just a very difficult month for indie games because of the fact that there were so many big names coming out that people were going to be more interested in. Now, because I am a video game connoisseur, any game that really catches my eye, usually I go for. And Hellboy caught my eye very early on, as I already said, so I decided to pick it up before Spider-Man came out and try to play as much as I could before that game came out. Because, as predicted, I did spend a lot of time with Spider-Man and other games that came out in October. But I did eventually get back around to Hellboy this past week, and I gotta say I'm genuinely surprised that not more that more people aren't talking about this game. Now I know that the combat can be a bit samey throughout your playthrough. I understand that. But it's the uniqueness in the enemies that pop up as you go through the Wyrd, the areas that you travel to, the different upgrades you can get, and the different character interactions you have inside of like this house that houses the way to get to the Wyrd. That really makes this game shine. And I'm not saying that the combat is bad or boring in my opinion. I think that it's a weighty and very tactical. And if you're just if you're just slamming buttons on your controller, you're going to have a much harder time getting through the final part of the game, or maybe even the final two parts of the game. Let's start all the way back at the beginning. So Hellboy and his crew of officers, BRPD officers, I think they're called. It's been a while since I started the game. I apologize. He goes into the Wyrd to find Lucky, one of the characters that you work with in the game, and Lucky gets trapped, and you got to go save him. And that's kind of like the tutorial for the game, the prologue of the game. It kind of sets up what's going on. You meet Scheherazade, who is the writer of the Wyrd, and Hellboy becomes the new protagonist in the Wyrd, as he tries to figure out what is going on to make these weird anomalies popping up around the world spike up and cause some havoc. So as you venture through your first time through the Wyrd, you're learning like, okay, things are a bit weird here. It's a lot of floating platforms with narrow bridges connecting them, and the art style in the game is amazing. Let's just start there while we're talking about it. Like the places you go to, the worlds, the views you see, the vistas, and and stuff like that. Like even though it's not like a overreaching like horizon, it's not like Horizon Zero Dawn or something like that where you see like this big vista of like, oh, I can go there and I can go there. When you're looking from a high place around this map, it's just a cool visual seeing these floating platforms, and there's just like a bunch of like stuff all the way in the background, and there's like these threads coming down from the sky. Most areas kind of look the same except for the final area, which is in a subway station setting. But the other ones kind of look the same, where it's a bunch of floating platforms connected by these little tunnel areas that you go through to get to the next area, which usually has either an enemy encounter, a shop, an upgrade, or a challenge room, or a boss. Eventually, there is a boss. So, I mean, I like how most of these areas look. I do wish that there was more variation, especially because like that last area with the subway is very unique compared to the other areas you go to. The three before that, like the first one's kind of like this Roman architecture kind of place. You're fighting these stone warriors with swords and shields and maces. And then the next area you go to is like this wooded area that's kind of a bit different from the first one, but it's still kind of like the floating platforms, but it's much more spooky, I guess, with these tangled vines and dead trees, and the enemies are like wolf-like creatures, quick hitting um, beasts that attack you. And then the third area is like this, supposed to be like this underwater world, but once again, it's floating platforms connected by bridges. Even though the enemies and the visuals are different, the idea is the same from the first two. And the enemies in this area are kind of like crab monsters, and there's like this mermaid type wizard who can throw smoke out and cloud your vision. And then finally, the subway station, which is the most unique out of all of them, is pretty much just an underground labyrinth where the hallways and train tracks lead you to different rooms, and the enemies in this area are much more difficult, and with these bat type enemies and vampiric type enemies who can hurt you from afar with bats and stuff like that. And each of these areas have cannon fodder enemies who are there to just kind of be like, hey, if you punch me, I give you shield, or whatever it's called. And in the last area, those little bitch enemies, fodder enemies, I'm sorry, they become two hits instead of one, so it changes things up just a little bit. But yeah, even though I like the way that all these areas look, I wish there was more areas like the subway or even like the wooded area that's a bit more unique, less of the standard than you get from the first, from the three areas from the start. And unfortunately, it never really gets more detailed or exciting than that, which is not wholeheartedly a bad thing. Like I said, I like the way that everything looks in the game. I would just hope for maybe a little bit more variation than what they gave us in the map designs. Of course, being a roguelite, every time you go through a map, it's going to be a little bit different. Not every room is going to be in the same place, or maybe there's going to be different upgrades here and there, or maybe you'll run into some different enemy configurations. And the main part of the game is attacking these elite enemies, the ones who are big and they're towering over the little guys. And the idea is to beat up those big guys. The little guys will just immediately go away once you beat them, which is nice. I would hate to have gone around and try to beat up every little tiny enemy that spawns. That would have been annoying. But focusing on the big elite enemies and only punching the little ones when you really have to, or maybe you want to get back some of your shield. I think it's called toughness, actually. Getting back some of your toughness, which is like a shield that protects your health and can recharge, and you can get little shards to recharge it faster. So what you want to do is you have a focus button, which is kind of like your lock-on. You hold that down to zoom in on an enemy and focus on the enemy. That way you can do bigger combos. If you're not focused on the elite, you'll just do a 1-2 punch with your regular fist, which is not going to be that great. But if you focus on the elite enemy, you can do a 4-hit combo, ending with a giant hit from the Hell Fist, which does a lot of damage, also does some knockback. And the cool thing about this game is a lot of the environment is interactable. So if you slam an enemy into a wall, their posture meter will fill up, and once that's totally filled up, you can do a mega punch on them. You can also hit them with your weapons that also fills up like your guns. So you have like a pistol to start off with that does posture damage. You have a shotgun that does loads of posture damage, but only at a close range. And then you have a grenade launcher which just does damage all around. You also have these little charms that you get that are these special abilities you have that are like a one-time, and then it's got a recharge kind of thing. You have to reload the guns, of course, but the charms they come back automatically. So the first one you get is this one that pushes away enemies. So every once in a while, elites will kind of be like, "Attack, minions!" They don't actually say that, but they point and they go, "Rah!" And the little minions start to crowd around you. So it's good for that. It's good for crowd control. You can push all the little guys back and then keep focusing on the big guy. The second one you get is a shield, so it can block one hit of damage on your character. So, that's very useful, especially if an enemy is charging up a big attack. And then the last one is a knife, which can pierce through the enemy's toughness and hit their health directly. It also stuns them for a second, so it can interrupt various moves that they're doing. So these elite enemies, they don't just have like regular old attacks. Like, sure, a lot of them punch and stuff like that. And you have like a dodge ability and a parry ability in your repertoire. But some of them have these like super big attacks that have like a gray circle forming around them, and they take long to charge up, and then they do devastating damage if they hit you. And the idea is to dodge these attacks. You don't want to try and parry them. Parrying will get you flattened. So it's not like Lies of P, where you have to parry the big attacks. It's more like any other Souls-like game almost, where you want to get away from the big attack and parry the smaller attacks. And as you parry smaller attacks, your fist meter will go up, and when it's fully enraged or whatever, you can unleash a devastating punching attack on the enemy that cripples them. It does not affect their toughness, but it does affect their health in large quantities. I used it mostly on the enemies who have like 10 health bars and then like 5 toughness, because they're the hardest to take down. And it does help a lot to whittle that down with the big punches, and then go in and whittle them down with your regular punches, which takes a little bit of time. But once you kind of go through the areas a couple times, you can start to understand the attack patterns of enemies and kind of predict what they're going to do sometimes. It's not 100%, of course, because there is that randomness factor of fighting an enemy, but once you see an attack coming, you'll kind of know what to do. Oh, I should parry this at this time. Oh, I should be dodging this one. And the unique thing about Hellboy is not only do you have a backstep, a sidestep, left and right, but you also have a duck. If you just press the dodge button without moving the joystick, you duck. And if you duck at the right time, or if you dodge at the right time in general, it'll open up the enemy for a punishing blow, which means that you're going to punch them in the face and they are going to take some major damage. So there's a lot of different things going on here. I think the dodging mechanic is pretty cool. Like, even though most attacks can't be dodged under, I really enjoy the animation when you duck under, and then the enemy kind of slows down, and it's like boom, and then you go uppercut, and it just hits him for mega damage. It's very cool. There's these pillars around each arena they can smash enemies into, and eventually they'll crumble and break, and you can actually throw objects from the rubble to do some posture damage to them, which is nice. It actually, I believe it makes you a bit invulnerable when you're picking up a boulder. So let's say you're at low health and enemy's charging up a big attack. If you time it right, you might be able to slip by that attack with the invincibility frames while picking up the rocks and stuff like that. So there you go. Of course, with this being a roguelite, there's going to be roguelite elements in here. So each run you get one of like 4 or 5 different upgradable items that you can find randomly. Some of them are really useful, other ones are not so useful. So to start off, sometimes you'll get a relic that will either give you extra health or extra toughness. You have to choose between one of the two. There's usually two decisions to make per relic that you pick up. So yeah, that's one of them. The other one is enemies can either drop more money or less money, but they drop health sometimes, which is really helpful later on in the game. So there's a whole bunch like that, and then there's ones that affect your specific weapon. So there's you can equip one to your fist, to your gun, or to your charm. Or was I calling it relic before? It's charm. The knife and the shield and the pushback are charms. I apologize. So each one of these relics that you pick up will give you some sort of special thing with your different weapon. So a lot of times when I was going through myself, the fist, if I found the frost relic, I would put that on my fist because every so often an enemy will freeze in place when your fist is ready to do a freeze attack. Pretty cool. There's one that I put on my knife a lot, which was one that gave enemies double damage. The more hits you do, the more damage they take. And the reason why I put that on my knife is because it recharged. I didn't use my knife to every single encounter. I did use it every single encounter, but I only used it when I really needed to, when the enemy was about to do like an attack or something like that. So I got used to putting it on my knife because when you do that, the enemy staggers back and you can wail on them. It was a pretty good combo. And then usually on the gun, I would put a different one of the miscellaneous ones that I didn't really care for. There's a lot of like I said, there's like 5 or so that you can pick up and put on a weapon. Some of them give you better environmental damage, so when you're pushing enemies into walls, it'll increase the damage. There's another one that oh man, I'm blanking on it now because I haven't used them in a while. I've been mostly using when I see the frost one and I see the extra damage one, I always go for those because the more you find, you can level up them to like level 3 or 4 or something like that, maybe 3. That's the highest level for those, and yeah, it just does better in general. So yeah, it's one of those things that mess around with it, see what suits you. I know that they're all useful. Don't get me wrong, but there were 2 that I found extremely useful throughout my time with the game. And as I mentioned before, there is money pickups in the game, which you use at the stores inside of the levels. You can't use them outside of levels. The money is only for inside the level. So each item you can either buy relics or extra health or something like that. There's also little offering sites you can go to, which will give you an extra relic if you offer money to them. Some of them you have to do a challenge for to get, so you have to beat a bunch of enemies in a row, and sometimes even like a mini boss. So there's a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. And then there's also these little orbs that you pick up each encounter and also throughout the world that you can use to upgrade stuff outside of the Wyrd, which are permanent upgrades. So the money upgrades that you buy inside the levels don't stick, but the permanent upgrades outside that you use the orbs for do stick. So you can increase your health, increase your toughness, increase your gun damage, increase your charm damage. There's a whole bunch of different things that happen, of course, when you upgrade them. So the more times going through the Wyrd, the more money you're going to get, obviously, and the more upgrades you'll be able to acquire. And by the time that I was at the last part of the game, I had really upgraded my health and toughness almost all the way. I had gotten enough orbs to do that, and then I realized, oh shit, I could have been upgrading my weapons this whole time. So I quickly went to the Wyrd a couple times to get some orbs to upgrade like my pistol and the knife, because those are the 2 things I was using the most. Mainly the pistol, because of the fact that it does so much posture damage at so far away. It makes it easy to go in there, do a heavy hit, and stun them for a second to do another heavy hit. Pretty useful. Of course, everything in the game is pretty useful, but it's more useful than, in my opinion, than other things. So yeah, I mean, throughout the story, I mean, if you don't want spoilers, obviously click off at this part, if you want to. But obviously, throughout the exploits of Hellboy in the Wyrds, you uncover that the Nazis are still alive in the Wyrds. Some of them were doing an experiment back in the 40s, and they got trapped into the Wyrd, and they've been writing their own story, upgrading themselves, creating kind of like a bit of a civilization, I guess you could say. And because of that, there are these super Nazi enemies inside the Wyrd who have like these big attacks, and they have big health bars, and they're the toughest enemies in the game. And actually, as you go through the Wyrd even farther, after this happens, the third part of a level after the boss fight, there will be these enemies who have upgrades on them placed by the Nazis to give them more damage and stuff like that. So it definitely gets more difficult as you go on. Because usually when you go into a Wyrd level, it's 2 floors. You beat the boss at the end of the 2nd floor. You move on. But once the Nazis get introduced, that's when the third floor starts showing up, and that's the floor with the Nazi installations and all the different weaponry and characters that you'll meet for the Nazis. And of course, now the task becomes, expelling the Nazis from the Wyrd or beating them down enough to get them to stop doing stuff in the real world. Obviously, um, and you meet the big bad Nazi who's telling them what to do and stuff like that. So it's a pretty good story. I enjoyed it a lot. The ending of the game, I was really starting to sweat because once you get through and once you get through several parts of this game, the final part is going through the final level of each level in a row without stopping. And that does include a final boss fight with the head honcho as well. So I was sweating by the end of this one, and I thought I was going to get stuck for quite some time. But just like with any Souls-like game or roguelike game, I took a break, went to sleep that night, woke up in the morning, went to work, came back home, and while someone was streaming, probably Callus, or whoever, I I just knocked it out. Maybe I was watching football that day. Yeah, either way, I knocked it out, and I was very satisfied. There's not many roguelike games that I feel satisfied after beating. Hellboy is definitely one of them. I felt very satisfied getting to the end and punching out the doing the last thing with the boss fight. I was living on 1 HP and a prayer. Of course, there are upgrades that you can get where you can survive a final hit and get a little bit of health back to try and knock it out. And that I got so low in health, but I didn't actually have to use that in my final confrontation. So that was nice. But it was still a very sweaty match between the final boss and me, and it was just a very satisfying ending. Like I said, the combat is so weighty and tactical that you really get into a rhythm sometimes, and you just kind of the controller kind of just floats in front of you and your mind is controlling it telepathically almost, and that's kind of how I felt at the end of Hellboy, fighting that final boss. Like I was watching myself play. It was an out of body experience, and when I finally hit the final blow, I zapped back into reality, and yeah, it was there goes gravity, and I was like, yes, this was great. So if you don't like roguelites, there are things that can help you in this game. There's a health booster. There's an enemy aggressiveness decreaser. There's a lock-on mechanic that allows you just to click it on and off if you want to. And there's also one other boost as well in the game. I don't remember what it was called, but essentially it stops enemies from attacking as quickly as they do normally. So there are some things to help you if you need that sort of thing for this game. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a roguelite still, so it does have some punishing moments, especially later in the game. And sometimes a run you'll just not find the things that you want or the things that you need for your character to level them up and get them to where you want them to be, which is just something that happens in roguelike games in general. There's really nothing you can do about it. But when everything hits just right, it's like that Pacha meme from Emperor's New Groove. You get the it's just right kind of feeling, and that's usually when you go all the way to the end and get through it. And not only, I mean, a lot of roguelites do have good stories as well, but this one also has a very good story attached to it. The voice acting is amazing. Lance Reddick, this is one of his last performances. It may be his last performance. I was under the impression that the Horizon Forbidden West DLC, Burning Shores, was his last voice work. But apparently he was cooking up the Hellboy Web of Wyrd, and that was a big surprise to me. Like I found out when the credits were rolling that he played Hellboy, and I was like, oh shit, no wonder I thought his voice acting was excellent. Like everyone in the game does a generally good job at what they're given, voice acting wise. But Hellboy was like above and beyond. I love the different things he added to his voice to kind of make it so he was he was kind of nonchalant, but he was also kind of aggressive at times. And yeah, it was just a very, very good performance. So rest in peace to Lance Reddick, one of the greats. Definitely shines in this game, which is possibly, I believe, his last work, voice acting at least. So kind of bittersweet, but also cool, very cool that I mean, he's going to live on through different mediums, of course, but yeah, this was a good send out. I thought that he did a really great job with Hellboy, and yeah, it was just an excellent game. I really enjoyed my time with it. Really, the only negative I have was the fact that like the levels, the first three levels out of the four were just a little bit too samey. The samey as in like the visual flair of like, oh, it's a floating platform and you go to that other platform essentially. Um, but other than that, it was all the rest of the game was great. I mean, I know there will be people who are like, but the combat's so it's so one note. You just you're fighting blah 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 blah. It's like, maybe get through the game a little bit longer, or farther. Maybe try and understand the ins and outs of the fighting before saying whatever you're gonna say, because I was kind of at the beginning was like, oh wow, this is pretty basic, punch 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 punch, but it quickly devolved, as I got farther into the game and met harder foes. It quickly turned into, okay, punch punch. I have an opening here. Dodge, block, parry. Going for the hit. Heavy fist, slam against the wall. You do the extra heavy fist because he's stunned. Pull out the gun, get the other guy's posture down before going up to him, knife him. It's one of those things that I really liked the gameplay loop and the combat in general. So that's just my opinion. Of course, everyone else can have their own opinions if they so desire. But yeah, all in all, very enjoyable, from the graphics all the way down to the story and the combat and the voice acting and stuff like that. I thought that everything really worked well in the game, and that's why Hellboy Web of Wyrd, I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. Thank you for listening to the final review. Appreciate you. If you want to leave a like on the video, I would appreciate that. And make sure you comment down below if you so desire.